The wicker basket sat perfectly centered on Elena Rodriguez's front porch, as if someone had measured the exact distance from each pillar. Inside, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket, a baby no more than 3 months old slept peacefully, tiny fists curled against rosy cheeks. A folded note tucked beneath the blanket simply read, "Please keep him safe until I return." No signature, no explanation. Just those 7 words that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had always been a light sleeper, a habit formed during her years as a pediatric nurse at Mercy General Hospital in downtown Millbrook, Texas. Even now, 3 years into retirement, the slightest sound could pull her from dreams. So when the soft crying drifted through her bedroom window at dawn, she was awake instantly, her trained instincts already cataloging the sound. Infant. Distressed but not in pain. Close by. She slipped her feet into worn slippers and padded to the front door, expecting to find a neighbor's cat or perhaps a bird caught in the porch eaves. What she found instead defied every reasonable explanation her 62-year-old mind could conjure. The baby was perfect, absolutely perfect. His skin held the warm golden tone that spoke of mixed heritage, and when he opened his eyes to look at her, they were the most striking shade of amber she'd ever seen. He couldn't have been on her porch long. His clothes were still warm, and there wasn't a trace of dew on the basket, despite the heavy morning mist that blanketed her 5-acre property. Elena lifted him carefully, her experienced hands automatically checking for signs of distress or illness. The baby was healthy, well-fed, and clearly loved. His clothes were expensive, a tiny cowboy outfit complete with miniature boots that probably cost more than Elena spent on groceries in a month. Someone had dressed him with care, choosing each piece with obvious affection. "Where did you come from, little one?" she whispered, but the baby simply gazed at her with those remarkable eyes, as if he held secrets too big for such a small person to carry. The note troubled her. The paper was thick, expensive stationery, and the handwriting was distinctly feminine, flowing script that suggested education and refinement. But it revealed nothing about identity, circumstances, or timeline. "Until I return" could mean hours, days, or years. Elena brought the baby inside, her mind automatically shifting into the problem-solving mode that had served her well during 40 years of nursing. First priority: ensure the child's immediate needs are met. She rummaged through boxes in her spare room, finding supplies left over from her nephew's visits years ago. The baby accepted a bottle of formula eagerly, confirming he was indeed well cared for but hungry. As she fed him, Elena studied his features more closely. The amber eyes were unusual enough, but there was something about the set of his jaw, the shape of his ears, that seemed familiar in a way she couldn't place. She'd worked with thousands of children over the years, and occasionally one would remind her of a sibling or parent she'd treated before. This felt different, though more immediate, more personal. Her phone rang as she was changing the baby's diaper. The caller ID showed her sister Carmen's number. "Elena, thank God you're up early. I've been driving all night, and I'm about 20 minutes from your place. Can you put coffee on?" Carmen Rodriguez Walsh lived in Dallas and rarely made unannounced visits, especially not ones that involved driving through the night. "Is everything okay? You sound stressed." "I'll explain when I get there. It's about, well, it's complicated. Family stuff." Elena glanced at the baby, who was now sleeping peacefully in a makeshift bed she'd created from throw pillows and a laundry basket. "Carmen, I need to tell you something strange has happened here. Someone left a baby on my porch this morning." The silence on the other end stretched so long Elena thought the call had dropped. "Carmen? A baby? What did ... How old?" 3 months, maybe 4. Hispanic, I think, with the most unusual amber eyes. "There was a note asking me to keep him safe until someone returns. but no other information. Another long pause. Elena, don't call the police yet. Please, wait until I get there. The urgency in Carmen's voice sent a chill down Elena's spine. Why? Do you know something about this? I might. Just don't make any calls until we talk, okay? I'm pulling into your driveway now. Elena heard a car door slam outside then. Carmen's hurried footsteps on the porch. Her sister burst through the front door without knocking, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her business suit wrinkled from the long drive. Carmen's eyes went immediately to the baby, and her face went white. Oh my God, it's really him. Him who? Carmen, what's going on? Carmen sank into Elena's favorite armchair, her hands shaking as she reached for the coffee Elena had prepared. Remember our cousin Isabella? She moved to Montana about 5 years ago after that messy divorce. Elena nodded. Isabella Martinez had been the family beauty, pursued by half the men in South Texas before she'd married young and moved away with her husband. The divorce had been spectacular, even by their family's dramatic standards, involving accusations of gambling debts and other women. Well, she didn't exactly disappear after the divorce like we thought. She got involved with someone up there, someone complicated. Complicated how? Carmen took a shaky sip of coffee. He's a rancher. Wealthy, established family, the whole 9 yards. But he's also married. Elena felt her stomach drop. Oh, Carmen, it gets worse. Isabella got pregnant. She wanted to keep the baby, but he made it clear that wouldn't work for his situation. So she disappeared completely, said she was going to have the baby somewhere safe and figure things out. And you think this is Isabella's baby? No, it is. Look at those eyes, Elena. Look at his face. He looks exactly like Isabella did as a baby, but with those eyes. Carmen's voice dropped to a whisper. Those are Mackenzie eyes. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. The Mackenzie family owned the largest ranch in 3 counties, their brand recognized throughout Texas and beyond. More importantly, she'd treated several Mackenzie children over the years, and those distinctive amber eyes were practically a family trademark. Which Mackenzie? Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. The oldest son, James Mackenzie. He inherited the main ranch when his father died 2 years ago. Elena knew James Mackenzie by reputation, a man in his 30s who'd married his college sweetheart and was considered one of the most eligible bachelors before his wedding 5 years ago. His wife was daughter of another prominent ranching family, and their marriage had been celebrated as a merger of 2 cattle dynasties. So Isabella left the baby here because she knows you and she trusts you, and because she's probably scared out of her mind. Carmen stood up and began pacing Elena's small living room. Think about it. She's got a baby by a married man whose family has enough money and influence to make her life very difficult if they choose to. She probably figures you're far enough from their usual circles to be safe, but close enough to family that the baby will be loved. Elena looked down at the sleeping child, her heart already aching at the thought of the complicated life ahead of him. What do you think she wants me to do? Honestly? I think she wants you to raise him. At least until she can figure out a way to do it herself without destroying everyone's lives in the process. The weight of that possibility settled over Elena like a heavy blanket. She'd never had children of her own, a source of quiet sadness that she'd learned to accept over the years. The opportunity to raise this beautiful child felt like a gift, but the circumstances surrounding it were a minefield of potential problems. There's something else, Carmen said quietly. I heard through the family grapevine that James Mackenzie's marriage has been rocky lately. His wife's had several miscarriages, and word is they're sleeping in separate bedrooms. If he finds out about this baby, he might want him, Elena finished. Or he might want him to disappear permanently. Men like that, with that much to lose. Carmen shrugged, but her meaning was clear. Elena spent the rest of the morning caring for the baby, while Carmen filled in more details about Isabella's situation. Their cousin had been working as a freelance graphic designer, taking contracts. That allowed her to travel. She'd met James Mackenzie at a charity auction in Billings, Montana, where she'd been hired to design promotional materials for the event. The affair had lasted nearly 2 years, conducted in hotel rooms and remote locations, always carefully hidden from public view. Isabella had genuinely believed James would leave his wife, especially after the third miscarriage made it clear they might never have children together. Instead, when Isabella told him she was pregnant, James had offered her money for an abortion, and a promise of more money to disappear permanently. Isabella had taken the money but kept the baby, using the funds to hide out in a small town near the Canadian border until the birth. She's been living under an assumed name, paying cash for everything, Carmen explained. But money doesn't last forever, and she's terrified of what will happen if James or his family finds out about the baby. Elena understood the fear. The Mackenzie family had a reputation for protecting their interests ruthlessly. There had been rumors over the years about business rivals who'd faced mysterious difficulties, about unfavorable stories that had been killed before publication. Nothing provable, but enough whispers to create a climate of caution around crossing them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As afternoon stretched into evening, Elena found herself falling deeper in love with the baby. He was remarkably good-natured, crying only when hungry or tired, and seeming to take comfort in her arms with an ease that suggested he'd been well-loved from birth. She caught herself humming lullabies she remembered from her childhood, and when he wrapped his tiny fingers around hers, her heart melted completely. Carmen stayed for dinner, both sisters avoiding the obvious questions about what to do next. They were washing dishes when they heard the sound of a truck engine in the driveway, a deep, powerful rumble that spoke of expensive machinery and serious purpose. Elena's hands stilled in the soapy water. She'd lived on this remote property for 8 years, and unexpected visitors were rare. The engine shut off, followed by the sound of boots on gravel, measured steps that suggested confidence and determination. The knock on the door was firm, but not aggressive, the knock of someone accustomed to having doors open for them, but polite enough to wait for permission to enter. Elena dried her hands slowly, her mind racing. Through the kitchen window, she could see the outline of a large pickup truck, expensive and well-maintained. Her heart hammered as she walked to the front door, Carmen close behind her. She opened the door to find a man in his mid-30s, tall and lean with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years of outdoor work. He wore clean jeans, a pressed shirt, and a black cowboy hat that had seen real use, but was obviously high quality. Most striking were his eyes, the same unusual amber shade as the baby sleeping in Elena's living room. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely, "I'm James Mackenzie. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Elena's hand tightened on the doorframe as she studied James Mackenzie's face. Up close, the resemblance to the baby was undeniable. The same strong jawline, the same distinctive eyes that seemed to hold flecks of gold in the porch light. But there was something else in his expression, a carefully controlled desperation that made her wary. "Mr. Mackenzie," she said carefully, not stepping aside, "it's rather late for unexpected visits." "Yes, ma'am, I apologize for the hour. I've been driving for 2 days straight, following leads." His voice carried the educated drawl of old Texas money, but underneath it, Elena detected genuine exhaustion. "I have reason to believe Isabella Martinez left my son in your care." Carmen appeared at Elena's shoulder, her face pale but determined. "How did you find us?" James's attention shifted to Carmen, and Elena saw recognition flicker in his amber eyes. "You must be Carmen Rodriguez Walsh. Isabella mentioned you worked in commercial real estate in Dallas." The fact that he knew Carmen's married name and profession sent a chill through Elena. It suggested surveillance, investigation resources that ordinary people didn't possess. "That doesn't answer my question," Carmen said coolly. James removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair that was mussed from the long drive. "Isabella used her real name at a clinic in Amarillo 3 months ago. From there, it was a matter of tracking family connections. Your sister's address was in public records." Elena's protective instincts flared. The baby, her baby now, she realized with sudden fierce possessiveness, was sleeping peacefully 20 feet away, unaware that his entire future hung in the balance of this conversation. "What makes you think there's a baby here at all?" she asked. James's smile was tired but genuine. "Because I can hear him breathing." Elena started, then realized the baby monitor on the side table was crackling softly with the sound of infant sleep. She'd forgotten it was on, and James's trained ear had picked up what her city-dwelling visitors might have missed. "May I come in, please?" The request was polite, but Elena sensed the steel underneath. This was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, one way or another. Elena stepped aside reluctantly. James entered her home with the careful awareness of someone comfortable in unfamiliar spaces, his eyes taking in details without appearing to stare. When he saw the makeshift baby bed in the living room, his entire body went rigid. He approached slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter something precious. The baby lay on his back, one tiny fist pressed against his cheek, the yellow blanket rising and falling with each breath. James knelt beside the improvised bed, and Elena saw his hands tremble slightly as he reached out, then stopped himself from touching. "My God," he whispered. "He's real. He's actually real." The raw emotion in his voice surprised Elena, whatever she'd expected from this confrontation. It wasn't the obvious wonder and love she was witnessing. "How long have you known?" Carmen asked from the doorway. James sat back on his heels, never taking his eyes from the baby. "Isabella left me a message 2 weeks ago. Just said there was something I needed to know, and gave me an address in Saskatchewan. By the time I got there, she was gone. But the landlord said a woman with a baby had checked out suddenly, leaving this address behind." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his shirt pocket, Elena's address written in the same feminine script as the note that had come with the baby. "She wanted you to find him," Elena realized. "I think she wanted me to have a choice," James corrected. "The same choice she never gave me before she disappeared." Carmen crossed her arms. "You mean the choice to abandon your responsibilities?" James's head snapped up, amber eyes flashing with anger. "I never abandoned anything. I didn't even know he existed until 2 weeks ago. Isabella said she told you she was pregnant. She said you offered her money to disappear. I offered her money to help with medical expenses and suggested she might be happier starting fresh somewhere new. I never knew she was actually pregnant. I thought she was trying to manipulate me into leaving my wife." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Elena sank into her armchair, trying to process this new version of events. "You thought she was lying?" Carmen pressed. "Isabella and I had a complicated relationship. She knew I was married, knew I couldn't offer her the kind of future she deserved. When she started talking about being pregnant, it felt like—" James paused, choosing his words carefully. "Like emotional blackmail. I'd seen her use similar tactics with other men." Elena winced at the harsh assessment, but she had to admit it fit with what she remembered of Isabella's pattern in relationships. Their cousin had always been dramatic, prone to grand gestures and emotional manipulation when she didn't get her way. "So you paid her off," Carmen said flatly. "I gave her $50,000 and wished her well. I thought that was the end of it." James turned back to the baby, his voice dropping. "If I'd known she was really carrying my child, what would you have done?" Elena asked. The question seemed to catch James off guard. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the sleeping infant with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "My marriage was already failing. My wife had lost 3 babies, and we could barely stand to be in the same room together. Maybe I would have seen it as a sign, a reason to finally end something that was making us both miserable. And maybe you would have done exactly what Isabella feared, used your family's influence to make her and the baby disappear permanently." James's jaw tightened. "You don't know me well enough to make that judgment. I know your reputation. My reputation is built on protecting what's mine. This child," he gestured toward the baby, "he's mine. My blood, my responsibility. I would never hurt him or anyone caring for him." Elena wanted to believe him, but 40 years of nursing had taught her to trust actions over words. "What do you want from us, Mr. Mackenzie?" "I want to take my son home where he belongs." "And where exactly is that?" Carmen interjected. "With your wife who doesn't know he exists? In a house where he'll be a constant reminder of your infidelity?" James stood abruptly, his composure cracking. "My wife and I are getting divorced. The papers were filed last week." The revelation shocked Elena into silence. Carmen recovered first. "How convenient, right after you found out about the baby." "The divorce has nothing to do with him," James snapped. "Margaret and I have been living separate lives for over a year. We finally admitted what everyone already knew. We're not right for each other, and we're not happy." He began pacing Elena's small living room, his boots making soft sounds on the hardwood floor. "The baby doesn't change the fact that our marriage was over, but he does change everything else. Such as the fact that I have a son who needs his father. Such as the fact that I want to be part of his life, to raise him, to give him everything I can." Elena studied James's face, looking for signs of deception or self-interest. What she saw instead was a man struggling with revelations that had upended his entire world. "What about Isabella?" she asked. "She's his mother. She carried him, gave birth to him, loved him enough to keep him safe. Isabella made her choice when she disappeared without telling me the truth. She's had months to contact me, to work something out. Instead, she left him on a stranger's doorstep with a note." "I'm not a stranger," Elena said quietly. "I'm family." James stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "You're right. And I'm grateful she chose someone who would care for him properly. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm his father, and I have rights." The legal reality of the situation settled over Elena like a weight. As the biological father, James would have significant legal standing, especially with his family's resources behind him. A prolonged custody battle would be expensive, emotionally draining, and ultimately might not serve the baby's best interests. "What kind of life can you offer him?" Carmen asked. "A single father running a ranch, dealing with a messy divorce, probably facing social scandal when people find out about the affair. A life with his father," James said simply. "A life where he knows where he comes from, where he belongs. My ranch employs 30 people year-round. He'd have stability, education, and opportunities." "And what about love?" Elena asked softly. The question seemed to hit James like a physical blow. He returned to the baby's bedside, kneeling again to study the small sleeping form. "Look at him," he said finally. "Look at those hands, that face. He's perfect. He's mine. How could I not love him?" Elena heard the sincerity in his voice, but she also heard something else: uncertainty. James was clearly overwhelmed by the situation, operating on instinct and emotion rather than clear thinking. "Love isn't automatic," she said gently. "Being a parent is about more than biology. It's about getting up at 3 in the morning when he's sick, about patience when he's teething, about putting his needs ahead of your own every single day for the next 18 years. I understand that, do you? Because what you're describing sounds more like ownership than parenthood." James's face flushed, but before he could respond, The baby stirred in his sleep, making soft murmuring sounds. All three adults froze, watching as tiny eyelids fluttered open. The baby's amber eyes, so like his father's, moved slowly around the room before settling on James's face. For a moment, father and son simply stared at each other, and Elena felt something shift in the air around them. James reached out tentatively, letting one finger brush against the baby's cheek. The infant turned toward the touch instinctively, and James's breath caught audibly. "Hello, little man," he whispered. "I'm your daddy." The baby's response was to grab James's finger in his tiny fist and hold on tight. James's eyes filled with tears, and Elena felt her own throat constrict with emotion. "What's his name?" James asked without looking away from his son. Elena realized with a start that Isabella had never provided a name. The note had said only to keep him safe, no other details about his identity or care. "Isabella didn't tell us," Carmen admitted. "We've just been calling him Baby." James was quiet for a moment, still letting the infant hold his finger. "Thomas," he said finally, "after my grandfather. Thomas James Mackenzie." Elena felt a pang at hearing the baby given a formal name, an identity that connected him irrevocably to the Mackenzie legacy. It made the situation feel more final somehow, more real. "Mr. Mackenzie," she began carefully, "I think we need to talk about what's best for Thomas, not just what you want." James finally looked up at her, and she was surprised by the vulnerability in his expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean that a baby isn't a possession to be claimed. He's a person with needs, and those needs should come first in any decision we make. His need is to be with his father. His need is to be with people who can provide him with stability, consistency, and unconditional love. Right now, your life is in upheaval. You're getting divorced, dealing with scandal, probably facing significant changes in your business and social relationships." James released Thomas's finger gently and stood up, his expression hardening. "Are you suggesting I'm not capable of providing for my own son? I'm suggesting that maybe what's best for Thomas isn't necessarily what you want for Thomas." The distinction seemed to genuinely perplex James. Elena could see him struggling with concepts that had never occurred to him. The idea that his desires might not align with his child's best interests, that good intentions weren't enough to guarantee good outcomes. Carmen stepped forward. "What if there was a compromise? A way for Thomas to have stability while you figured out your situation?" Both Elena and James looked at her expectantly. "What if Elena kept Thomas for now with you visiting regularly? You could be part of his life, help support him, but he'd have the consistency of staying in one place with someone who's already bonded with him." Elena's heart leaped at the suggestion, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. James, however, was already shaking his head. "No, absolutely not. I've missed the first 3 months of his life already. I won't miss any more. Even if it means putting him through the chaos of your divorce proceedings. Even if it means exposing him to whatever social fallout comes from this situation." James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Thomas and the two women who had become his unexpected guardians. "You think I'm selfish," he said finally. Elena chose her words carefully. "I think you're a man who's had his world turned upside down and is trying to regain control. That's understandable. But Thomas isn't a way to regain control, he's a responsibility. I know that, do you? Because the way you've talked about him tonight, he's mine. He belongs with me. It sounds more like you're claiming property than accepting responsibility." The criticism clearly stung, but James didn't deny it. Instead, he sank into Elena's couch, suddenly looking at every one of his 34 years. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly. "I've never had to think about anyone but myself and my responsibilities to the ranch. The idea that I have a son, that he's been in the world for months without me knowing." He trailed off, rubbing his face with both hands. Elena felt her heart soften despite her wariness. No one knows how to be a parent at first. It's something you learn by doing. But you think I should learn somewhere else while someone else raises my child. Alina looked at Thomas, who had drifted back to sleep with the unconscious trust of a well-loved infant. The sight of him stirred something fierce and protective in her chest. I think, she said slowly, that we need to find a solution that puts Thomas first, whatever that looks like. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Thomas's soft breathing and the distant sound of night insects chirping outside Alana's windows. James sat with his head in his hands, the weight of unexpected fatherhood clearly overwhelming him. Alina watched him struggle, recognizing the signs of a man whose carefully ordered world had just collapsed. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. Suddenly James looked up, surprised by the apparent change of subject. "What? Your ranch, what's it like? What would Thomas's life be like there?" Carmen shot Alina a warning look, but Alina ignored it. If they were going to make decisions about Thomas's future, she needed to understand all the options, not just her own desires to keep him. James straightened slightly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders as he shifted to familiar ground. "The Circle M has been in my family for 4 generations. 15,000 acres of some of the best grazing land in North Texas. We run about 3,000 head of cattle, plus quarter horses. That's a lot of responsibility." "It is." "I'm up before dawn most days, checking on the herds, managing the hands, dealing with suppliers and buyers. During calving season, I might not see the inside of the house for days at a time." Alina nodded thoughtfully. "And your house? What's it like?" "Big. Too big, really, for just one person. My great-grandfather built it to house a large family. 8 bedrooms, formal dining room, library, the works. Margaret always said it felt like living in a museum." "Margaret is your wife?" "Soon-to-be ex-wife." James's voice tightened. "She never really adapted to ranch life. She grew up in Dallas, went to private schools, had debutante balls. She thought marrying a rancher would be romantic, but the reality of rural life wore thin pretty quickly." "What? About staff? People to help with a baby?" James considered this. "Rosa Hernandez has been our housekeeper for 20 years. She helped raise me after my mother died. She'd be good with Thomas, I think. And her daughter Maria works part-time doing laundry and cleaning. She has 3 kids of her own." Alina filed this information away. The presence of experienced mothers might make the ranch a more suitable environment for an infant than she'd initially assumed. "What about your social situation? You mentioned scandal." James's jaw tightened. "People talk in small towns. My affair with Isabella wasn't exactly secret. I wasn't careful enough. Most people assumed it ended when she left town 2 years ago. Finding out there's a baby will definitely cause gossip. And that doesn't concern you?" "I've never lived my life based on what other people think. The people who matter will understand. The ones who don't matter can think whatever they want." Carmen spoke up from her position by the window. "What about your ex-wife? How is she going?" To react to suddenly having a stepchild she knew nothing about? "Margaret won't be part of Thomas's life. Our divorce settlement includes a clean break. She keeps her family's property in Dallas. I keep the ranch. No ongoing obligations." "But the scandal will still affect her," Alina pointed out. "People will know her husband had an affair that resulted in a child." James was quiet for a moment. "Margaret and I hurt each other enough during our marriage. I don't want to add to that. But I can't change what happened with Isabella, and I won't pretend Thomas doesn't exist to spare anyone's feelings." Alina appreciated his honesty, even as she worried about the complications it would create. "What about Isabella? Have you tried to contact her since you found out about Thomas?" "I hired a private investigator to track her down. She's living in a small town outside Calgary, working at a coffee shop under the name Maria Santos. She's been there about a month." "And?" And she's not answering her phone or returning messages. The investigator says she seems jumpy, paranoid. She changes apartments every few weeks, never stays anywhere long. Carmen crossed her arms. Can you blame her? She's probably terrified you'll try to take Thomas away and cut her out completely. That's not what I want. What do you want? Elena asked. James was quiet for several minutes, his eyes fixed on Thomas's sleeping form. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. I want to know my son. I want him to know me, to understand where he comes from. I want to be able to teach him things, how to ride, how to work with his hands, how to respect the land and the animals. I want to give him roots, heritage, and belonging. And Isabella? I want her to be part of his life too. Despite everything that happened between us, she's his mother. She carried him, gave birth to him, loved him enough to keep him safe when she could have just ... He gestured vaguely. Thomas deserves to know both his parents. Elena felt some of her hostility toward James softening. His vision of co-parenting sounded reasonable, even ideal. But she'd learned to be skeptical of ideal solutions. That sounds wonderful in theory. But Isabella is clearly afraid of you and your family. She's not going to trust me easily. I know. That's part of why I need to get this right from the beginning. If I can prove to her that I'm serious about being a good father, that I'm not trying to cut her out or punish her, maybe she'll come home. Home, James colored slightly. Back to Texas, close enough that we can share custody properly, that Thomas can have both parents in his life. Elena wondered if James understood how complicated that arrangement would be, given the history between him and Isabella. But before she could voice her concerns, Thomas began to fuss, making the soft whimpering sounds that meant he was hungry. I'll get his bottle, Elena said, starting to rise. Can I? James asked quickly. Can I feed him? Elena hesitated. Part of her wanted to maintain control, to keep the barriers between James and Thomas firmly in place. But she could see the longing in James's face, the desperate need to connect with his son. Have you ever fed a baby before? No, but I've bottle-fed plenty of calves and foals. The principle can't be that different. Despite the situation's seriousness, Elena found herself smiling. The principle is similar. The execution requires a bit more finesse. She prepared Thomas's bottle while James watched intently, as if memorizing every step. When she handed him the warm formula, their fingers brushed briefly, and Elena was surprised by how steady his hands were. Support his head and neck, she instructed as James carefully lifted Thomas from his makeshift bed. That's right. Hold him at an angle so he doesn't take in too much air. James settled back onto the couch with Thomas cradled against his chest. The baby latched onto the bottle immediately, amber eyes opening to study his father's face with the serious concentration infants brought to their meals. He's strong, James murmured, adjusting his grip as Thomas grabbed at the bottle with tiny fists. He's healthy. Isabella took good care of herself during the pregnancy. How do you know? Elena gestured toward Thomas. Look at him. Good muscle. Tone, clear eyes, healthy reflexes. Plus, he's obviously been well fed and loved since birth. Whatever else you might think about Isabella's choices, she's been a good mother. James absorbed this silently, his attention focused completely on the baby in his arms. Elena watched the interaction with mixed feelings, relief that James seemed genuinely caring, anxiety about what it meant for her own future with Thomas. He has your eyes, Carmen observed from across the room. And Isabella's nose, James replied. Her mouth too, I think. Elena was struck by how naturally James seemed to take to holding Thomas, how comfortable the baby appeared in his father's arms. She'd worked with enough families to recognize when parent and child were a good fit, and despite her reservations about James, she couldn't deny the easy connection between them. What happens next? She asked when Thomas had finished eating. And James was attempting to burp him. I'd like to take him home tonight. Absolutely not. Elena's response was immediate and firm. Thomas has been through enough upheaval. He needs stability, routine. You can't just uproot him in the middle of the night and drive him to an unfamiliar place. James's jaw tightened, but before he could argue, Carmen stepped forward. She's right, James. Think about what's best for Thomas, not what you want. I am thinking about what's best for him. He belongs with his father. He belongs where he's safe and loved, Elena corrected. Right now that's here. He knows my voice, my touch. He's comfortable in this environment. So what are you suggesting? That I leave him here indefinitely? Elena took a deep breath, knowing her next words would change everything. I'm suggesting we take this slowly. Let Thomas adjust gradually. You can stay nearby, spend time with him, learn how to care for him properly. When you're both ready, then we can talk about him coming to live with you. Staying nearby where? There aren't any hotels within 50 miles of here. Elena exchanged a glance with Carmen, who nodded almost imperceptibly. You can stay here. I have a guest room. It's not fancy, but it's clean and comfortable. James looked surprised by the offer. You'd do that? After everything? I'd do it for Thomas. He needs time to bond with you properly, and you need time to learn what it means to be his father. This isn't about you or me. It's about giving him the best possible start in life. James was quiet for a long moment, still holding Thomas against his shoulder. The baby had fallen asleep again, completely relaxed in his father's arms. How long? James asked finally. However long it takes. A week, a month, I don't know. Until you're both ready. And then? Elena's throat tightened. And then we'll figure out what comes next. James nodded slowly. Okay, I accept your offer. But I want to be clear about something. I will be taking Thomas home eventually. I'm not abandoning my responsibilities as his father, I understand. And I want to try to contact Isabella again. She needs to know what's happening, needs to be part of these decisions. Elena agreed, though she wondered how Isabella would react to the news that James had found Thomas and was now living in the same house as her son. There are going to be rules, she continued. This is my home, and while you're here, we do things my way. I make the decisions about Thomas's care, his schedule, his needs. You're here to learn and to bond with him, not to take over. James's expression suggested he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded. Fair enough. Carmen looked between them with obvious concern. Are you sure about this, Elena? Having him here, getting Thomas attached to him, and then having to let him go? Elena looked down at Thomas, peaceful in his father's arms, and felt her heart clench. She was already attached, had been from the moment she'd lifted him from that basket on her porch. The thought of eventually losing him was almost unbearable, but she also knew that running away from James, trying to keep Thomas from his father, would ultimately serve no one's interests. Better to face the situation head-on, to give both father and son the chance to build a relationship, than to fight a battle she would likely lose in court. I'm sure, she said quietly. Thomas deserves to know his father. And his father deserves the chance to prove he can be the parent Thomas needs. James met her eyes across the room. Thank you. I know this isn't easy for you. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. It wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. But sometimes the right choice was also the most difficult one. I'll get fresh sheets for the guest room, she said finally. Carmen, can you help me? As the two sisters worked together to prepare James's accommodations, Elena tried to push down her fears about what she'd just committed to. She was opening her home to a virtual stranger, a man whose presence would complicate every aspect of her quiet life. More importantly, she was opening her heart to the possibility of losing the child she'd already begun to love as her own. But when she returned to the living room and saw James reading quietly to Thomas from one of her nursing journals, the only reading material within reach, she knew she'd made the right choice. Thomas deserved this chance to know his father, just as James deserved the opportunity to prove himself worthy of his son's love. The road ahead would be complicated, fraught with emotion and difficult decisions. But for tonight, it was enough that Thomas was safe, warm, and surrounded by people who wanted what was best for him. Everything else would have to be figured out one day at a time. Elena woke before dawn to the sound of quiet movement in her kitchen. For a disoriented moment, she'd forgotten about her unexpected houseguest, and her heart raced with the possibility of an intruder. Then she heard the soft murmur of a man's voice and remembered. James Mackenzie was attempting to prepare Thomas's morning bottle. She slipped on her robe and padded barefoot to the kitchen, where she found James standing at the counter in jeans and a t-shirt, his hair still mussed from sleep. He held Thomas against his shoulder while trying to test the formula temperature on his wrist, clearly struggling to manage both tasks simultaneously. "You're up early," Elena observed quietly, not wanting to startle him. James turned, relief evident on his face. "He started fussing about 20 minutes ago. I thought I'd let you sleep, but this is harder than it looks." Elena approached and gently took the bottle from him, testing it herself. "Still too warm. Run some cold water over it." She studied James's face, noting the exhaustion around his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" "Some. I kept checking on him, making sure he was still breathing." Elena smiled despite herself. "That's normal for new parents. You'll drive yourself crazy if you check on him every hour. I've never been responsible for anything this fragile before. Calves are born walking. Foals can run within hours, but this..." He looked down at Thomas with something approaching awe. "He's completely helpless. That's what makes human babies so special. They're born trusting completely that someone will take care of them." Elena took Thomas from James's arms, settling into her routine of morning care. "It's also what makes parenting so terrifying." James watched intently as she tested the bottle again and offered it to Thomas. "How do you know so much about babies? Carmen mentioned you never had children of your own." The question stung, but Elena had learned to discuss her childlessness without flinching. 40 years of pediatric nursing. I've helped thousands of parents learn to care for their babies. Sometimes experience is just as valuable as biology. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." It's not prying. It's a reasonable question from someone trying to figure out whether to trust me with his son. James leaned against the counter, studying her with those penetrating amber eyes. "I do trust you. That's what makes this so complicated." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I can see how much you already love him. I can see that he's comfortable with you, that you know exactly what he needs. Part of me wonders if I'm being selfish, trying to take him away from that." Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected such honesty from him, especially not so early in their arrangement. "And the other part of you?" "The other part knows that love isn't enough. Thomas needs to know where he comes from, who his people are. He needs the security that comes with belonging to something bigger than any one person can provide." Elena considered this as she burped Thomas, recognizing the truth in James's words even as they challenged her own growing attachment. "Tell me about your family. What would Thomas be inheriting if he comes to live with you?" James's expression grew more animated. "The Mackenzie Ranch has been profitable for 4 generations. Thomas would never want for anything education, opportunities, experiences. When he's old enough, he'd have his choice of involvement in the business, or he could pursue his own interests with our support." "That's not what I meant. I'm talking about family grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. What kind of extended family would he be joining?" James was quiet for a moment. "My father died 2 years ago, heart attack. My mother died when I was 12, cancer. I have a younger sister, Kate, who lives in Colorado with her husband. They have twin daughters, about 5 years old now, so Thomas would have cousins." "He would. Kate's been after me to visit more often, bring the girls to the ranch for summers." Having Thomas might actually bring us closer together. Elena filed this information away, adding it to her mental picture of Thomas's potential future. What about your father's side, grandparents? My grandfather died last year at 91. He was the one who really taught me to run the ranch. My grandmother is still alive, she's 87, lives in a retirement community in Austin. Sharp as a tack, but her health isn't great. She doesn't know about Thomas yet? Nobody knows except you, Carmen, and my lawyer. I wanted to figure out the situation before I involved the rest of the family. Elena appreciated his discretion, though she wondered how his grandmother would react to news of a great-grandson born under such circumstances. What about your divorce? How is that progressing? James's jaw tightened slightly. Margaret's being reasonable about the property division, but there are still details to work out. Her lawyer keeps pushing for more generous spousal support, claiming she sacrificed her career for our marriage. Did she? She had an art history degree and worked at a gallery in Dallas for about 6 months before we married. I'm not sure that constitutes a sacrificed career, but I'm willing to be fair. Elena heard the edge in his voice and suspected there was more to the story. Will she contest your custody of Thomas? She can't. We're not married anymore, and Thomas isn't her biological child. She has no legal standing. Legal standing isn't the same as moral standing. She might feel betrayed, angry enough to cause problems. James was quiet for several minutes, watching Elena feed Thomas with practiced efficiency. Margaret and I hurt each other in a lot of ways during our marriage. Her infertility, my affair, the constant tension about ranch life versus city life. But she's not vindictive. Once the divorce is final, I think she'll want to move on with her life. Elena hoped he was right, but she'd seen enough family drama to know that hurt feelings could motivate people to surprising lengths of revenge. Carmen appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for her drive back to Dallas. How did the first night go? Better than expected, Elena admitted. James managed the 3 a.m. feeding on his own. Barely, James corrected with a self-deprecating smile. I nearly dropped in twice trying to hold both the baby and the bottle. Carmen poured herself coffee and settled at Elena's small kitchen table. So what's the plan for today? Elena looked at James expectantly. She'd offered him the chance to learn to care for Thomas, but she wasn't sure what that actually meant. In practical terms, I'd like to spend the day just watching him, learning his routines, James said. And I want to try calling Isabella again. She needs to know what's happening. What if she demands you bring Thomas to her immediately? Carmen asked. Then we'll figure something out. But she has a right to know where her son is and that he's safe. Elena appreciated James's commitment to including Isabella, even though it complicated an already difficult situation. What about your ranch? Can you just disappear for an indefinite period? I have a good foreman. Mike Santos has been with us for 15 years. He can handle day-to-day operations. I'll need to drive back periodically to handle financial decisions and deal with any major issues, but most of that can wait. Carmen drained her coffee cup and stood. I need to get back to Dallas. I have showings this afternoon. She turned to Elena. Are you sure about this arrangement? It's not too late to change your mind. Elena looked at Thomas, now sleeping peacefully in her arms, then at James, who was watching them both with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'm sure Thomas needs this chance to know his father. Carmen hugged her sister goodbye, whispering in her ear, call me if you need anything. And I mean anything. After Carmen left, the house seemed suddenly quiet and intimate. Elena found herself hyper-aware of James's presence, the way he moved through her space with careful respect, the intensity of his focus when he looked at Thomas. Would you like me to show you how to change a diaper? She offered. God, yes. I tried to figure it out from watching you last night, but there seemed to be a lot of technical details involved. Elena laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had since finding Thomas on her porch. It's not rocket science, but there are definitely techniques that make it easier. She led James to the living room and laid Thomas on a blanket on the floor. First rule, always have everything you need within reach before you start. Babies have a talent for making messes at the worst possible moments. James watched intently as she demonstrated the process, asking detailed questions about each step. When it was his turn to try, his hands were gentle but uncertain, and it took 3 attempts to get the diaper properly secured. "This is humbling," he admitted as Thomas kicked happily on the blanket. "I've been telling myself that if I can manage a ranch and 3,000 head of cattle, I can certainly handle one small baby. Babies are different. They're not predictable like cattle. They don't follow schedules or respond to the same techniques every time. You have to learn to read their individual signals." "What are Thomas's signals?" Elena settled on the floor beside James, close enough that she could smell his aftershave mixed with the lingering scent of hay, and horses that seemed to cling to him despite his shower. "He's actually very easy to read. When he's hungry, he makes little rooting motions with his mouth and gets increasingly fussy. When he's tired, he rubs his eyes and gets cranky. When he needs changing, he gets very still and quiet, like he's concentrating. And when he's happy?" Elena smiled, reaching out to stroke Thomas's cheek. "He makes these little cooing sounds and his whole face lights up. He's generally a very content baby. Isabella did a good job with his early care." James was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about what you said last night, about love not being automatic. What if I'm not good at this? What if I can't give him what he needs?" The vulnerability in his voice surprised Elena. "What makes you think you won't be good at it?" "I'm used to being in control, having clear solutions to problems. This feels so uncertain, so dependent on instincts I'm not sure I have." Elena studied his profile as he watched Thomas. "The fact that you're worried about it is actually a good sign. The parents who struggle the most are usually the ones who think they have all the answers." "Is that supposed to be reassuring?" "It's supposed to be honest. Parenting is mostly trial and error, especially in the beginning. You make your best guess, see how it works, and adjust accordingly." James reached out tentatively to touch Thomas's tiny fist. "He's so small. What if I hurt him without meaning to?" "You won't. You're being careful, paying attention to his responses. That's all any parent can do." They spent the morning in a comfortable routine, Lena teaching James the basics of infant care while Thomas obligingly demonstrated various needs and moods. James proved to be a quick learner, though his inexperience showed in small ways. He held Thomas a bit too stiffly, spoke to him in the same tone he might use with ranch hands, and seemed perpetually surprised by how much attention a baby required around noon. James excused himself to try calling Isabella. Elena could hear him in the guest room, leaving another voicemail message explaining the situation and asking her to call back. When he returned to the living room, his frustration was evident. "Still nothing?" Elena asked. The phone rings straight through to voicemail. Either she's not answering calls from numbers she doesn't recognize, or she's avoiding me specifically. Can you blame her? From her perspective, you're probably the last person she wants to hear from right now. James sank into Elena's armchair, running his hands through his hair. I understand why she's scared. But this affects her too. She has a right to know where Thomas is, to be part of decisions about his future. Maybe she doesn't want to be part of those decisions. Maybe leaving him here was her way of stepping back, letting you take responsibility. You think she's abandoning him? Elena considered the possibility. I think she's a young woman who's been under enormous stress for months, trying to figure out how to raise a baby on her own while hiding from a man she's afraid of. She might see this as her best option for giving Thomas a stable life. James was quiet for a long moment. If that's true, if she really wants to step back, then this becomes simpler in some ways. and more complicated in others. Thomas will want to know about his mother when he's older. If Isabella disappears completely now, that creates a different kind of problem. I won't let her disappear. Even if she doesn't want to be actively involved in raising him, Thomas deserves to know who she is, why she made the choices she did. Elena appreciated James's commitment to preserving Isabella's place in Thomas's life, even under difficult circumstances. It suggested a maturity and fairness she hadn't expected from him. The afternoon passed quietly, with James gradually taking on more of Thomas's care while Elena supervised and guided. By evening, he was changing diapers competently and had successfully given Thomas a bath, though Elena had hovered anxiously nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. As they prepared dinner together, Elena cooking while James held Thomas, she found herself adjusting to the domestic rhythm of their temporary arrangement. James was respectful of her space and routines, helpful without being intrusive, and genuinely focused on learning to care for his son. "This is nice," James said suddenly as they sat down to eat, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his portable seat. Beside the table, what is this? Family dinner, quiet conversation, a baby sleeping nearby. I never had this growing up. My parents were always busy with ranch business, and after my mother died, it was just my father and me eating in silence most nights. Elena felt a pang of sympathy for the lonely boy James must have been. Is that what you want for Thomas? A different kind of family experience? I want him to feel secure, loved, part of something bigger than himself. I want him to have the stability I didn't always have, but also the warmth. And you think you can provide that? James met her eyes across the table. I think I can learn to provide it, especially if I have help from people who know more about families than I do. Elena understood the implication that he saw her as someone who could teach him not just about baby care, but about creating the kind of family environment Thomas would need. The realization both warmed and worried her, adding another layer of complexity to their already complicated situation. 3 days into their arrangement, Elena's phone rang at 6 in the morning. She fumbled for it in the darkness, her heart immediately racing with worry that something had happened to Thomas. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a Canadian area code. "Hello?" she whispered, not wanting to wake James or the baby. "Is this Elena Rodriguez?" The voice was young female and shaking with barely controlled emotion. "Isabella?" "Yes, I got a message that James found Thomas. Is he okay? Is my baby okay?" Elena slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen, closing the door behind her. "He's fine, Isabella. He's healthy and safe. Where is he?" "The message said he's with you, but James was there too. I don't understand what's happening." Elena could hear the panic in Isabella's voice and chose her words carefully. "James came here looking for Thomas after he tracked down your note. We've worked out a temporary arrangement where James is staying here, learning to care for Thomas, while we figure out what's best for everyone." "James is living in your house?" Isabella's voice pitched higher. "Elena, you don't understand what kind of man he is, what his family is capable of. You can't trust him." "Isabella, I need you to calm down and listen to me. James has been nothing but respectful since he's been here. He's genuinely trying to learn how to be a good father. He's manipulating you. He's probably already talking about taking Thomas back to his ranch, cutting me out completely. That's what powerful men do. They take what they want and destroy anyone who gets in their way." Elena recognized the hysteria building in Isabella's voice and drew on her nursing experience to project calm authority. "Isabella, take a deep breath. Tell me where you are right now." I'm in a motel outside Calgary. I've been moving around since I left Thomas with you, trying to figure out what to do." "And what do you want to do? What's your ideal outcome in this situation?" The question seemed to catch Isabella off guard. "I want my baby back. I want to raise him myself, somewhere safe where James can't find us. That's not realistic, Isabella. James knows about Thomas now. He has rights as the father, and he has the resources to find you wherever you go. Running isn't a solution, it's just postponing the inevitable. So what are you suggesting? That I just hand over my son to the man who wanted me to abort him? Elena pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down, recognizing this was going to be a long conversation. I'm suggesting that you need to be part of the solution instead of running from the problem. James wants you involved in Thomas's life. That's what he's telling you. But once he has legal custody, once Thomas is living on his ranch surrounded by Mackenzie money and influence, what leverage will I have? The fear in Isabella's voice was genuine, and Elena couldn't entirely dismiss her concerns. She'd witnessed enough custody battles to know that good intentions could evaporate quickly when lawyers and family pressure got involved. What if there was a way to protect your interests legally before any arrangements were made? Elena asked. What if you could negotiate from a position of strength? How? Come back to Texas, talk to James directly. Work out a custody agreement with proper legal representation before Thomas leaves my house. Isabella was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if the call had been dropped. Isabella? I'm scared, she whispered finally. I'm scared of him, of his family, of losing Thomas forever. I'm scared that if I come back, I'll never see my son again. Elena's heart ached for the young woman. Whatever mistakes Isabella had made, whatever poor choices had led to this situation, she was still Thomas's mother, and her fear was real. What if I promised you that wouldn't happen? What if James agreed to certain conditions before you came back? What kind of conditions? Elena thought quickly, trying to imagine what might reassure Isabella while still being acceptable to James. What if he agreed that Thomas would stay here with me until you two worked out a formal custody arrangement? What if he agreed to mediation instead of litigation? What if he put money in escrow to pay for your legal representation? He would do that? I don't know, but I could ask him. Isabella was quiet again. Can I talk to Thomas? Can you put the phone near him so I can hear his voice? Elena's throat tightened. Of course, hold on. She crept back through the house to the living room, where Thomas was sleeping peacefully in his portable crib. She held the phone close to him, and Isabella's voice came through the speaker, soft and full of love. Hi, baby boy. It's Mama. I miss you so much. I know you can't understand, but everything I'm doing is to keep you safe. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Thomas stirred slightly at the sound of her voice, his tiny features shifting as if he recognized something familiar. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the obvious bond between mother and child. He moved, she told Isabella quietly. He knows your voice. Isabella's sob was audible through the phone. I can't do this anymore. I can't stay away from him. But I'm so scared of what will happen if I come back. Then let's make sure you have protection before you come back. Let me talk to James about those conditions I mentioned. You would do that for me? I'd do it for Thomas. He needs both his parents in his life, but he needs them to work together, not fight over him. They talked for another 10 minutes, with Elena explaining more about James's behavior since he'd been staying with her, and Isabella sharing more about her fears and concerns. By the end of the conversation, Isabella had agreed to consider returning to Texas if James would agree to Elena's proposed conditions. When Elena hung up, she found James standing in the kitchen doorway in his pajama pants and t-shirt, his hair sticking up from sleep. I heard voices, he said quietly. Was that Isabella? Yes, she's scared, James. Really scared of what will happen if she comes back. James rubbed his face with both hands. What did you tell her? That you want her to be part of Thomas's life. That you're not trying to cut her out or punish her. And she believed you? She wants to believe me. But she needs reassurance, something concrete that protects her interests. James poured himself coffee from the pot Elena had started earlier, his movements careful and deliberate. What kind of reassurance? Elena outlined the conditions she'd discussed with Isabella, watching James's face for his reaction. His expression remained neutral until she mentioned the part about Thomas staying with her until custody was resolved. How long could that take? He asked. Weeks, maybe months. It depends on how complicated you two want to make it. James leaned against the counter, staring into his coffee cup. I don't want to make it complicated. I want what's best for Thomas. Then you'll agree to the conditions? I'll agree to mediation and paying for her legal representation. But I'm not comfortable with Thomas staying here indefinitely while lawyers argue over details. Elena felt a stab of disappointment, though she wasn't sure if it was for Isabella's sake or her own selfish desire to keep Thomas longer. What would you be comfortable with? A reasonable timeline. Say, 2 months to work out a custody agreement. If we can't reach an agreement by then, we move to arbitration with a binding decision. Elena nodded slowly. I think Isabella might accept that, especially if you put the legal fee money in escrow up front. How much are we talking about? Enough for her to hire a good family lawyer, probably $50,000. James didn't flinch at the amount. Done. Anything else? She wants to see Thomas as soon as she gets back. She's been separated from him for almost a week now. Of course. I want them to have a relationship. Elena studied James's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. What she saw instead was exhaustion and genuine concern. The past few days of intensive baby care had clearly taken a toll on him, but they'd also deepened his commitment to being a good father. There's something else, she said carefully. Isabella is going to want to know about your divorce, about what Thomas's life will be like if he comes to live with you. My divorce should be final within the month. As for Thomas's life, Bill quotes. James paused, choosing his words carefully. I want him to grow up knowing both his parents love him. I want him to have stability, education, opportunities. I want him to understand his heritage and feel proud of where he comes from. And Isabella's place in all of that. She's his mother. That will never change, regardless of what happens between us. I made mistakes with Isabella, hurt her in ways I'm not proud of, but Thomas shouldn't pay the price for my failures. Elena felt some of her protective instincts toward Isabella relaxing. James seemed genuine in his desire to include her, though. She knew the test would come when they were all in the same room together, negotiating the details of their complicated future. I'll call Isabella back this afternoon and tell her about your agreement to the conditions. If she accepts, how soon? Could you arrange for the legal fee money? I can have it transferred today. My lawyer can set up the escrow account by tomorrow. Elena nodded, then looked toward the living room where Thomas was beginning to stir. He'll be hungry soon. Do you want to handle his morning feeding? Yeah. James's face softened as it always did when he talked about caring for Thomas. I'm getting better at the bottle thing. They moved into their established morning routine, but Elena could sense an undercurrent of tension. The prospect of Isabella's return was changing the dynamic of their temporary family arrangement, forcing all of them to confront questions they'd been avoiding. As James fed Thomas, Elena found herself studying them both with new eyes. Over the past few days, she'd watched father and son develop a genuine bond. James had moved beyond the initial awkwardness to become genuinely competent at baby care, and Thomas had clearly grown comfortable with his father's touch and voice. But she'd also grown more attached to Thomas herself, falling into a routine of caregiving that felt natural and fulfilling in ways she'd never experienced. The thought of giving him up to James, to Isabella, to anyone was becoming increasingly painful. Elena? James's voice interrupted her. Brooding, are you okay? Fine, just thinking about how complicated this is all going to get once Isabella comes back. James shifted Thomas to his shoulder for burping, his movements now automatic and confident. It doesn't have to be complicated. We're all adults who want what's best for Thomas. Surely we can find a way to work together. Elena appreciated his optimism, but she'd lived long enough to know that good intentions weren't always enough when emotions and legal rights collided. What if Isabella wants primary custody? What if she wants to take Thomas back to Canada? Then we'll negotiate. Figure out visitation schedules, shared holidays, educational decisions. Plenty of divorced couples manage to co-parent successfully. You and Isabella were never married. You don't have the same legal framework to guide you. James was quiet for a moment, continuing to pat Thomas's back until the baby released a satisfying burp. We'll create our own framework. Write our own rules. And if she doesn't trust you enough to agree to shared custody, then I'll have to prove to her that she can trust me. However long that takes. Elena hoped he meant it, but she also knew that patience had limits, especially when lawyers and family pressure entered the picture. Your family doesn't know about Thomas yet. How do you think they'll react when they find out? James's expression grew troubled. My sister will be thrilled. She's been wanting me to have children for years. My grandmother will probably have strong opinions about the circumstances, but she loved Thomas once she meets him. And the people who depend on your ranch for their livelihoods? How will they react to their boss having an illegitimate child with a woman who's been hiding from him? The people who work for me are good people. They'll judge Thomas on who he is, not how he came to be. Elena wasn't sure James fully understood the potential social complications, but she decided not to press the point. There would be time enough to deal with those challenges when they arose. The morning passed quietly, with James handling more and more of Thomas's care while Elena worked on her household tasks. She found herself watching their interactions with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Pride in James's growing competence as a father. Melancholy at the reminder that her role in Thomas's life was temporary. Around noon, James announced he needed to drive back to his ranch to handle some business that couldn't wait any longer. I should be back by evening, he said, clearly reluctant to leave. Take your time. Thomas and I will be fine. Are you sure? I know this isn't what you signed up for when you agreed to let me stay here. Elena looked at Thomas, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms after his lunch feeding. Actually, it's exactly what I signed up for. Taking care of babies, helping families figure out what's best for everyone involved. James's smile was warm and genuine. Thank you for everything. I know this situation isn't easy for you either. After he left, Elena found herself alone with Thomas for the first time since James's arrival. The quiet felt strange after days of constant adult conversation and shared responsibilities. She settled into her favorite chair with Thomas, letting herself imagine what it would be like if this were permanent, if she were truly his guardian rather than a temporary caretaker. Fantasy was seductive and dangerous. She was already 62 years old, probably too old to raise a child from infancy to adulthood. She lived alone on a modest pension, with no experience as a primary parent. Thomas deserved more than she could offer him, but as she looked down at his peaceful face, felt the warm weight of him in her arms, she couldn't help wishing that circumstances were different. She'd never expected to experience the fierce protective love that parents described, the willingness to sacrifice anything for a child's well-being. Finding Thomas on her porch had awakened something in her that she'd thought was permanently dormant. The phone rang, interrupting her melancholy thoughts. Isabella's voice was steadier than it had been that morning, more determined. I've been thinking about what you said, Isabella began. About coming back, working things out legally, and I want to do it. I want to see my son, and I want to make sure he has the best possible future. But I need those guarantees you mentioned. Elena smiled, feeling a surge of hope for the first time in days. James has already agreed to all the conditions. He's arranging for the legal fee money today. Isabella sounded surprised. Just like that? Just like that? He wants you to come back, Isabella. He wants to work this out. When can I see Thomas? How soon can you get here? I could be there tomorrow evening if I drive straight through. Elena's heart hammered with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Tomorrow everything would change again, and she had no idea what the outcome would be. Then come home, she said softly. It's time for all of us to figure out what comes next. Isabella Martinez arrived at Elena's house just as the sun was setting, her small Honda Civic loaded with everything she owned. Elena watched from the window as the young woman sat in her car for several minutes, gathering courage before stepping onto the porch where she'd left her son 8 days earlier. When Isabella finally knocked, Elena was struck by how fragile she looked. The confident, vivacious woman Elena remembered from family gatherings had been replaced by someone thinner, more cautious, with shadows under her dark eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Isabella. Elena opened her arms, and her cousin fell into them with a sob of relief. Is he really okay? Is Thomas really safe? He's perfect. Come see for yourself. Elena led Isabella into the living room, where Thomas was sleeping in his portable crib. Isabella approached slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might make him disappear. When she saw him, healthy and peaceful, her knees gave out and she sank to the floor beside the crib. Oh, my baby. My beautiful boy. She reached through the bars to stroke his cheek with trembling fingers. Mama's here now. I'm so sorry I left you. Thomas stirred at her touch, his eyes opening to focus on her face. For a moment, mother and son simply looked at each other, reconnecting after their week-long separation. He's grown, Isabella whispered. Even in just a week he looks bigger. Babies grow fast at this age. But he's been healthy and happy. James has been helping me take care of him. At the mention of James's name, Isabella's body tensed. Where is he? He went back to his ranch this afternoon to handle some business. He should be back within the hour. Isabella picked up Thomas carefully, holding him against her chest as if she could absorb him back into herself. I've missed him so much. I kept thinking I'd made a terrible mistake, leaving him with people he didn't know. He knew me, Elena said gently. And he's gotten to know James too. They've bonded over the past few days. Isabella's face clouded. What's James been like? Has he said anything about what he wants to do? Elena chose her words carefully. He wants to be Thomas's father. He wants to be involved in his life, help raise him, give him opportunities. And what about me? He wants you involved too. He's been saying from the beginning that Thomas needs both his parents. Isabella looked skeptical. That's easy to say when he's trying to convince you to trust him. But once he has legal custody, once Thomas is living on his ranch... Isabella, you have to stop thinking of this as a battle you're destined to lose. James has agreed to mediation, to paying for your legal representation, to keeping Thomas here until you two work out an agreement. Those aren't the actions of someone planning to cut you out. Isabella stood up and began pacing with Thomas, her movements agitated despite her obvious joy at holding him again. You don't understand what his family is like. The Mackenzies have been the most powerful family in 3 counties for generations. They're used to getting what they want, and they don't like scandals. James says his grandmother will love Thomas once she meets him. His grandmother will love Thomas despite his circumstances, not because of them. And she'll want to make sure those circumstances don't reflect poorly on the family name. Elena recognized some truth in Isabella's concerns, but she also sensed that fear was making her cousin see threats where none might exist. What happened between you and James, Isabella? Really happened, not the version you told Carmen. Isabella stopped pacing, her cheeks flushing. What do you mean? I mean that James says he didn't know you were really pregnant when you disappeared. He thought you were trying to manipulate him. Isabella's face crumpled. I was, at first. When I realized I was pregnant, My first thought was that this was my chance to make him leave his wife. I told him I was pregnant and gave him an ultimatum: either he chose me and our baby, or I'd make sure everyone knew about our affair. Elena sat down heavily. Oh, Isabella, I know it was wrong. I know it was manipulative and selfish. But I loved him, and I thought if he knew about the baby, he'd realize that we belonged together. And when he didn't, when he offered me money instead of a future, I was so angry and hurt that I took the money and disappeared without telling him I was actually pregnant. I thought I'd show him I'd have the baby on my own and prove I didn't need him. But you did need him. Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper. By the time Thomas was born, I realized how impossible it was going to be to raise him alone while hiding from James. But I was too proud to admit I'd made a mistake, too scared of what James would do if he found out the truth. Elena understood now why Isabella was so frightened. She'd built a web of deception and manipulation that had trapped her as much as anyone else. Coming clean meant admitting to behavior she wasn't proud of, behavior that could be used against her in a custody battle. James knows about the manipulation attempt, Elena said gently. He's not holding it against you. How can you be sure? Because he's had a week to think about it, and his focus has been entirely on Thomas. He's not interested in punishing you, Isabella. He's interested in being a father. Before Isabella could respond, they heard James's truck in the driveway. Isabella clutched Thomas tighter, her face going pale. I can't do this. I'm not ready to face him. Yes, you are. You're Thomas's mother. You have just as much right to be here as he does. James's boots on the porch steps seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. When he opened the door and saw Isabella holding Thomas, he stopped completely, his expression unreadable. Isabella, James. The two of them stared at each other across Elena's living room, years of complicated history and recent revelations hanging between them. Thomas, oblivious to the tension, reached up to touch his mother's face with a tiny hand. You look well, James said finally, his voice carefully neutral. So do you. Isabella's voice was barely audible. Elena could feel the weight of everything left unsaid between them. Why don't you both sit down? We need to talk about Thomas's future, and that conversation will go better if everyone is comfortable. James settled into the armchair while Isabella remained standing, swaying slightly with Thomas in her arms. Elena recognized the protective posture. Isabella was keeping distance between Thomas and his father, maintaining physical control of the situation. Isabella, James began, I want you to know that I understand why you were afraid to contact me directly. I want you to know that my only interest is in being the best father I can be to Thomas. And what does that look like to you? Isabella's voice was stronger now, more challenging. It looks like all three of us are working together to give Thomas the most stable, loving childhood possible. It looks like shared custody, shared decisions, shared responsibility. Shared custody means he splits his time between us. Where would I live? How would I support myself during the times he's with you? James had clearly thought about this. There's a house on my property that my ranch foreman used to live in before he got married and moved to town. It's small but comfortable, completely private. You could live there rent-free, and I'd provide financial support for your expenses. Isabella's eyes widened. You want me to live on your ranch? I want Thomas to have both his parents close by. I want him to be able to move between our homes without feeling like he's traveling to a foreign country. And your neighbors? Your social circle? How do you think they'll react to your baby mama living in your backyard? James's jaw tightened. Slightly. I stopped caring what my neighbors think about my personal life the day I decided to get divorced. Anyone who has a problem with our arrangement is welcome to keep their opinions to themselves. Elena was impressed by James's forethought and his apparent willingness to weather social complications for Thomas's sake, but she could also see the flaws in his plan. What about Isabella's independence? She asked. living on your property, accepting your financial support that creates a power imbalance that might not be sustainable long-term. What do you suggest instead? James asked. I suggest we start smaller. Figure out custody arrangements first, then worry about living situations. Isabella needs time to establish herself independently before making decisions about where to live. Isabella looked grateful for Elena's intervention. I need to finish my education. I was working on a graphic design degree before everything happened. I'd like to complete that. Establish a career that can support Thomas and me. That sounds reasonable, James agreed. How long would that take? 2 years, maybe 3 if I go part-time so I can spend more time with Thomas. James nodded slowly. We could work out a custody schedule that accommodates your class schedule. Thomas could stay with me during your school hours, with you evenings and weekends. And summers? Holidays? What happens when he starts school himself? Elena watched the two of them begin to negotiate the practical details of shared parenting. Relieved that they were focusing on Thomas's needs rather than their own grievances. But she also felt a growing sadness as the reality of her situation became clear. Once James and Isabella worked out their custody arrangement, there would be no place for Elena in Thomas's daily life. She'd return to her quiet retirement, her empty house, her routine of small volunteer activities and occasional visits from family. The week of intensive mothering she'd experienced would become just a memory. Elena? Isabella's voice interrupted her brooding. What do you think about the custody schedule we've outlined? Elena realized she'd been only half listening to their conversation. I'm sorry. Could you repeat it? Monday through Wednesday with me, Thursday through Sunday with James, alternating holidays, and flexibility around my class schedule, Isabella summarized. Elena nodded, though something about the arrangement troubled her. Have you considered what Thomas's perspective will be? Constantly moving between 2 homes, 2 sets of rules, 2 different environments? James and Isabella exchanged glances. Most divorced parents manage shared custody successfully, James said. Most divorced parents have a history of living together, of establishing consistent approaches to parenting. You two are starting from scratch with very different backgrounds and expectations. What are you suggesting? Isabella asked. Elena took a deep breath, knowing her next words might change everything. I'm suggesting that maybe Thomas needs more stability than a back-and-forth custody arrangement can provide. Maybe he needs a primary home with one parent and regular, consistent visitation with the other. Which parent? James asked quietly. Elena looked between them, seeing the hope and fear in both their faces. This was the moment when good intentions would collide with practical realities, when the adult's needs would have to be balanced against a child's best interests. I don't know, she admitted. That's a decision you two need to make together, based on who can provide the most stable environment for the next few years. Isabella clutched Thomas tighter. I'm his mother. I carried him, gave birth to him, cared for him from the beginning. And I'm his father, James countered. I can provide financial security, educational opportunities, extended family connections. Elena saw the old adversarial dynamic resurging and intervened quickly. Stop, both of you. This isn't a competition about who loves Thomas more or who deserves him more. This is about what arrangement will best serve his development. Both parents fell silent, chastened. Let's approach this differently, Elena continued. Instead of focusing on your rights, let's focus on Thomas's needs. He's 4 months old now. What will he need at 6 months? At 1 year? At 5 years? Isabella spoke first. Consistency. Routine. The security of knowing what to expect each day. Stimulation, James added. Opportunities to explore, learn, develop his capabilities. Emotional security, Elena continued. The knowledge that both his parents love him and will always be part of his life, regardless of where he lives day to day. They spent the next hour working through the practical implications of different custody arrangements, considering factors like Isabella's school schedule, James's ranch responsibilities, Thomas's developmental needs, and the logistics of maintaining two homes. Gradually, a picture emerged of what might work best. Thomas would live primarily with Isabella for the first few years, with James having generous visitation rights and shared decision-making authority. As Thomas got older and more adaptable, they could transition to a more equal sharing arrangement. But where would Isabella live? James asked. She can't afford her own place while she's in school. There are options, Elena said carefully. Student housing, family assistance, government programs for single mothers. Or she could accept my offer of the house on the ranch, James said. Close enough for me to see Thomas daily, independent enough for Isabella to maintain her autonomy. Isabella was quiet for several minutes, considering the proposal. What would happen if things got tense between us? If we disagreed about Thomas's care or couldn't get along as neighbors? Then we'd work it out like adults, James said. With mediation if necessary, with legal intervention if all else failed. But I'd rather try cooperation first. Elena watched. Isabella wrestled with the decision, understanding the appeal of James's offer while also recognizing the risks. Living on James's property would solve Isabella's immediate housing and financial problems, but it would also create a complex web of dependencies that might be hard to escape if the arrangement didn't work out. I need time to think about it, Isabella said finally. This is all happening so fast. Of course, James agreed. Take whatever time you need. In the meantime, Thomas can stay here with Elena while we work out the legal details. Both parents looked at Elena expectantly, and she realized they'd been assuming she would continue caring for Thomas indefinitely. The assumption was both flattering and painful. Flattering because it showed their trust in her abilities, painful because it highlighted how attached she'd become to a situation that was fundamentally temporary. I'm happy to continue caring for Thomas while you two figure things out, she said carefully. But we should establish a timeline. Thomas needs permanence, not an indefinite holding pattern. 2 weeks? Isabella suggested. Long enough for me to find an apartment and meet with the lawyer James is paying for? Elena felt her heart sink even as she nodded agreement. 2 weeks to say goodbye to the child who had transformed her quiet life into something rich and meaningful. 2 weeks to prepare for a return to solitude. But as she looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, while his father watched with obvious adoration, she knew she was making the right choice. Thomas needed his parents to work together, needed the security of knowing both of them were committed to his well-being. Her role had always been temporary. Now it was time to step back and let the real family begin. 2 weeks later, Elena stood on her porch holding Thomas for what she knew would be the last time as his primary caregiver. The morning air carried the scent of autumn, and golden leaves drifted across her yard like scattered promises. In an hour, James would arrive to drive Thomas and Isabella to their new home, the small house on the Mackenzie Ranch where they would begin their unconventional family arrangement. Are you ready for your big adventure, little man? Elena whispered. Against Thomas's soft hair. He gurgled happily, his amber eyes bright with the curiosity that had emerged more strongly each day. Isabella appeared in the doorway, her own eyes red-rimmed from a night of packing and worrying. Over the past 2 weeks, she had transformed from the frightened young woman who'd arrived at Elena's door into someone more confident, more purposeful. The legal consultation James had funded had given her the security of knowing her rights were protected, and the gradual rebuilding of trust between the parents had eased many of her fears. Elena, I don't know how to thank you, Isabella said, settling beside her on the porch swing. You saved us all, you know that? Elena managed to smile despite the ache in her chest. You saved yourselves. I just provided a safe place for it to happen. You provided more than that. You showed James how to be a father. You showed me that I didn't have to choose between protecting Thomas and letting him know his dad. You gave us all time to figure out what family means." Elena handed Thomas to his mother, watching as he immediately relaxed into Isabella's familiar embrace. The bond between them had strengthened during these 2 weeks, with Isabella taking over more of his daily care while James learned to step back and support rather than take charge. "What are you most nervous about?" Elena asked. Isabella considered the question seriously. "Living so close to James. We're getting along well now, but we've never tried to share the same space long term. What if we start fighting again? What if our old patterns come back? Then you'll work through them for Thomas's sake. Both of you have grown a lot these past weeks." It was true. Elena had watched James evolve from a man trying to claim his son into someone genuinely focused on Thomas's well-being. He'd learned to read the baby's cues, to prioritize routine over convenience, to seek input rather than make unilateral decisions. More importantly, he'd learned to see Isabella as a partner rather than an obstacle. Isabella had undergone her own transformation, shedding the victim mentality that had driven her into hiding and embracing the responsibilities of being Thomas's advocate and protector. She'd enrolled in online classes to complete her degree, opened her own bank account, and begun building the independent life she'd need to be an equal partner in co-parenting. James's truck appeared at the end of the driveway, punctual as always. Elena felt her composure threatening to crack as reality settled over her like a heavy blanket. "I'm going to miss him so much," she admitted. Isabella reached over to squeeze her hand. "You'll still be part of his life. James and I have talked about it. We want you to be his honorary grandmother. We want him to know the woman who kept him safe when he needed it most." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. The promise of ongoing contact was meaningful, but they all knew it wouldn't be the same as these weeks of intensive daily caregiving. James climbed the porch steps, his expression gentle as he took in the emotional tableau. He'd grown more attuned to others' feelings during his stay, more aware of the impact his presence had on the delicate balance they'd all been navigating. "The truck's packed," he said quietly. "Are you ready?" Isabella stood up with Thomas, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. "As ready as I can be." Elena rose to help carry the remaining bags, determined to see this transition through with dignity. As they loaded the last of Isabella and Thomas's belongings, she found herself memorizing details, the way Thomas's tiny fist curled around Isabella's finger, the careful way James arranged the car seat he'd learned to install perfectly, the nervous excitement in both parents' faces. "Elena," James said as they prepared to leave, "I know we've put you through a lot these past weeks. I know this isn't how you planned to spend your retirement." "It's been the most meaningful weeks of my retirement," Elena replied honestly. "Watching you become a family, being part of Thomas's beginning, it's been a privilege." James's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "If you ever need anything at all, you call us. Thomas is going to want to know the woman who loved him first." Isabella hugged Elena carefully, mindful of the baby between them. "We'll bring him to visit every week until he's old enough to drive here himself. This will always be his first home." Elena kissed Thomas's forehead one final time, breathing in his sweet baby scent and committing it to memory. "Be good for your mama and daddy, little one. Remember that you are so very loved." As the truck disappeared down her driveway, Elena stood alone on the porch where this extraordinary chapter had begun. The basket was long gone, replaced by proper baby furniture that would go with Thomas to his new home. But the memory of that morning, the soft crying that had drawn her outside, the perfect trust in those amber eyes would stay with her forever. 6 months later, Alana's kitchen table was covered with photographs. Thomas sitting up on his own in Isabella's small living room. Thomas taking his first taste of solid food while James laughed at his disgusted expression. Thomas at Christmas, surrounded by presents from his Mackenzie relatives, who had welcomed him with the fierce protectiveness Elena had hoped for. "He's gotten so big," Carmen observed, visiting for Sunday dinner, as had become their tradition since the Thomas chapter ended. "5 teeth now," Elena said proudly. "And he's pulling himself up to standing. Isabella thinks he might walk early." "How? Are James and Isabella getting along?" Elena smiled, remembering her most recent visit to the ranch. "Better than anyone expected. They're not romantic anymore, that bridge was thoroughly burned, but they've become genuine friends. Isabella's thriving in school, and James is completely devoted to being the best father possible." "And you? Any regrets about how it all turned out?" Elena considered the question while she poured coffee. The house was quiet again, her days structured around her own needs rather than an infant's demands. Sometimes she woke in the morning and felt the silence like a physical weight. But when she thought about Thomas' safe, loved, growing up with both parents who were learning to put his needs first, she felt only satisfaction. "No regrets," she said finally. "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is help create a family, even when you're not going to be part of it." Carmen nodded, understanding in her eyes. "But you are part of it, just in a different way than you expected." Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Isabella, a video of Thomas clapping his hands while James sang a silly song. The pure joy on both their faces made Elena's heart swell with a grandmother's pride. "Yes," she agreed, watching the video again. "Just in a different way." Outside her window, autumn was giving way to winter, and Elena's small garden lay dormant under a blanket of fallen leaves. But inside her house, warmed by memories and sustained by the knowledge that she'd helped 3 people find their way to each other, Elena felt a deep contentment. She'd found a baby in a basket on her porch, and in keeping him safe, she'd discovered that family wasn't always about blood or legal arrangements. Sometimes it was about love offered freely in a moment of need, about trust built slowly over time, about the willingness to let go when holding on would serve only your own desires. Thomas, James Mackenzie, would grow up knowing his story, how his mother loved him enough to keep him safe, how his father learned to put his son's needs first, and how a woman named Elena Rodriguez had opened her heart and home to make their family possible, and that, Elena thought as she saved the video to watch again later, was the best possible ending to a story that had begun with a basket, a note, and 7 words that changed everything. "Please keep him safe until I return." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.